This week, I'll be checking out what potentially could be the collected edition of the year, the House of X and Powers of 10 Oversized Hardcover. In this new life, I'll be checking out the House of X and Powers of 10 Oversized Hardcover. What is happening, everybody? I hope all of you are well and enjoying the amount of collected editions that all the major publishers are dishing out week after week. If you have been following me on Instagram and Twitter, you know that since July this year, I have been obsessively ranting how good Jonathan Hickman's issues of House of X and Powers of 10 are week after week. Now that the 12-issue series is over, thankfully the collected editions team over at Marvel did not drop the ball and delivered us readers without wasting no time an oversized hardcover right before Christmas. We absolutely have to give them a round of applause by not going the trade paperback than oversized hardcover route, because for us collected edition readers, we tend to gravitate more to the larger format hardcovers. So without further hesitation, let's get right into it. This new relaunch of the X-Men universe was laid out over the course of 12 issues split evenly between House of X and Powers of 10. All 12 issues were written by Jonathan Hickman, where he had set the course for everything readers will need to know about the franchise going forward. Now this is unfortunately where I have to get a tiny bit spoilery and walk a very fine line here. Hopefully you won't crucify me in the comments below. To understand what Hickman really achieved here is to draw comparisons with what other writers did in the past. Whether it be Grant Morrison or Brian Michael Bendis, their relaunches still took into account the entire continuity of the MCU and the X-Men franchise, which is a ton of baggage. In other words, this tied the writers' hands on where they could take the franchise in the direction where they wanted to. Now, how Hickman approached this relaunch completely blew my mind. He totally embraced all the rich history and found a way to take the best qualities of the franchise and restart it in a very unique way through the character Moira McTaggart. I am not going to spoil why Moira changes everything and how she creates this new status quo, but I can safely say we are talking about a clean reboot. This is basically on the same level of the New 52 for the X-Men franchise, and even to the extent of the MCU with no mistakes. There's so much I want to discuss here, from Professor X and Magneto finally locked into the United Front to the mutant leaders establishing the Quiet Council of Krakoa. But breaking down all 12 issues for you all will potentially rob you from all the emotions you experience reading this cover to cover. If they ever decide to drop an omnibus with this and a Dawn of X titles in the future, I believe that will be the time to get into the spoiler review. As you may have noticed in the intro, the House of X and Powers of 10 oversized hardcover has two dust jackets. The regular is by Pepe Larraz with Marty Gracia, and the direct market variant is the iconic connecting cover piece from the first issues of House of X and Powers of 10, and it's by Mark Brooks. I was very fortunate to grab a print of this from him to get this signed at New York Comic Con this year, and one day I hope to own the Virgin editions of the comic CGC'd. Before we get into the build of the book, we have to put emphasis here on the stellar design by Tom Muller. Everything he did here was from the ground up, and we can first see this from the updated X logo that is totally different to what's come before, yet it respects the history of the franchise. On the dust jacket, one of the first things I noticed is the X keyline wraps around both covers and is even printed on the reverse side. Now that's attention to detail. For the Pepe Larraz regular cover, Tom used the red 032C Pantone color, which hopefully you can tell is a different shade of red from the Marvel logo. He had described on Twitter that he chose the red, white and black color scheme due to Marvel's signature branding, and he thought it was appropriate for the relaunch of the X-Men. He had also used this on the first issues of House of X and Powers of 10. For the Mark Brooks direct market variant, the artwork wraps around the spine so we lose the minimalistic design, and for those wondering, it doesn't fully wrap all the way to the back. Also, if you're curious, I'm going to leave the Mark Brooks direct market variant wrapped until the Pepe Larraz regular cover gets completely beaten up and the pages start falling out. I have a feeling I'll be revisiting this oversized hardcover many times over the years. Now diving into the contents of the book, the story is told in sequence just as how the issues were coming out week after week. There is no table of contents here and none is needed, but you obviously can tell that each chapter break has an indicator whether it was a House of X or Powers of 10 issue, and the color also lines up with the color from the logo from the issue 2. But before the 12 issue story begins, we have Muller's X on every page leading up to the credits of the entire creative team. Here you can see Pepe Larraz was the artist for House of X, while R.B. Silva was the main artist for Powers of 10. Let's also give credit here to the entire collected edition and Marvel team here for producing such a masterpiece. Flicking through the pages, we can see that Larraz and Silver's work flows seamlessly from issue to issue. Before this title, I was somewhat familiar with their works, but now I'm a huge fan. I like to also mention the colors by Marty Gracia throughout the entire book is on point, and if it was not for him, we wouldn't be feeling the landscapes of Krakoa or getting the chills from the panels between Destiny and Moira. As we traverse through the book, we can also see that a big part of the world building that Hickman achieves here are all the charts, diagrams, tables, and one-sheets that completely fleshes out everything you need to know for that chapter. These info one-sheets range from a Krakoan alphabet translator to solidifying on who the known Omega level mutants are. Moving on to the build of the book, the cardstock underneath the dust jacket is absolutely solid and there are no signs of warping whatsoever. The paper stock is on point and there are no signs of wrinkles. For the binding, unfortunately it's glued, but I cannot penalize Marvel or the printing company for this, as this title doesn't have a significant amount of double page spreads and any gutter loss witnessed here is not impacting the story or even the ever important chart. Another point on the binding that I have to make is that I noticed Tom Muller pointed out on Twitter that they made sure that the headband also has the same red and black pattern that runs throughout the book. No doubt there was a lot of thought that went into this. Finally, moving on to the extras, we get a full page cover gallery for the A covers, but for the variants, unfortunately it's 4 per page. I know the cover price may have been a bit high for some at $60 for its recommended retail price, but I wouldn't have minded if they jacked it up to $75, but we get full page covers for all the variants. Better yet, if Marvel would just release an XXL edition of all the covers, including the store variants, that would be absolutely mind-blowing and no doubt a mandatory pick. After the cover gallery, the last 4 pages are designs by Larraz and RB Silver, with House of X and Powers of 10 dramatically redefining the entire world of the X-Men and their place in the MCU. I'm sure that you'll be eager to read the next chapter, which is the Dawn of X. I highly recommend picking up the single issues if you have a local comic store nearby, but if you only read in collected editions, Marvel has got you covered because they aren't waiting for 6 issues to be done before we get a trade. Instead, they are collecting all the number ones for each of the Dawn of X titles in a single trade paperback. Slated for February next year, the trade paperback will contain the first issue of X-Men, X-Force, Marauders, Excalibur, Fallen Angels, and New Mutants. Given Marvel went the trade paperback route, I assume we'll see oversized hardcovers for each title when we get at least 12 issues released. For my final thoughts, I can say that growing up in the 90s, I have no doubt been a huge X-Men fan where I was obsessed with the TV show, the Jim Lee trading cards, and even more so all the X titles from Uncanny X-Men to Generation X. But somewhere in the late 90s, I lost complete interest and never got back on the train, whether it be Onslaught, House of M, AVX, Battle of the Atom, etc, etc. I definitely don't have a love-hate relationship with the franchise, but it wasn't until I was introduced to the very first issue of House of X where it just reignited the passion I had for the X-Men in the 90s, and now all these X titles overshadows all the other books I have been picking up across the publishers week to week. This release at the end of the year is so fitting because I can honestly say that out of all the books we got this year, this is no doubt the collected edition of the year. Hickman, Pepe Larraz, RB Silva, Marty Gracia, Tom Muller, together with a slew of superstar cover artists, no doubt knocked this completely out the park. I am sure I am not alone here, as the sales and the reader feedback have been phenomenal for Marvel. Fingers crossed that Hickman oversees the franchise for the next decade, as we truly need a long-term relationship with all the mutants on the island of Krakoa. I absolutely can't recommend this book highly enough. This is such a flawless piece of writing and art. Again, many thanks for your support this year, and if you have any feedback or questions, feel free to put a comment down below or reach out to me on Instagram and Twitter. This is Alex, and I'll catch you in the new year.